You're listening to the Empty Nest Empires podcast, episode number 4. We have been going through brief introductions of 5 pillars of building an empty nest empire. And the next pillar that's so important to leaving a legacy is your faith. Now, for some, I understand this might be a sticky topic, and maybe you're thinking, how on earth can I equate having a personal faith with empire building? But stick with me here. I personally have a great heritage of faith in my family history, which I'll get to in a minute. But even if you have never stepped foot inside a house of worship, believe it or not, you are leaving a legacy of faith for your family. Sticky topic indeed. Let's dive in. Okay, your nest is empty, or it will be within a few years. So now what? Whether you know it or not, we are building empires. Empires of faith, family, fun, fitness, and of course, finance. And those empires are the legacy we leave for our loved ones. I'm Tammy Romani, an empty nester mom, grandma, and entrepreneur with a vision for ever greater things in the years ahead. It's never too late, and there is no limit to what we can do. I'm so happy you're here. Now let's get to building. Okay, here's what I believe. I believe that even if you say you are an atheist or agnostic, you are still leaving a faith heritage for others to remember. Now, it will most likely be a no-faith heritage, but it will stick nonetheless. And yes, I do believe that having faith or not is a very personal matter, and everyone is welcome here. But I also have experience with a very personal God who meets you where you are. So yes, I'm a God girl, a Jesus follower, but I have to say, I'm not like the so-called Christians in the political news who give us a very bad name. In my faith world, everyone is welcome. All are accepted for who they are, and everyone is responsible for their own relationship with God. Yes, I want to share with you His goodness and His mercy and His amazingness, but it's not my job to force you into faith. That's God's job. So I am blessed to attend a multi-ethnic, intergenerational church here in Southern California, and it's important to us to do life with those who don't look like us, don't think like us, don't eat like us, don't love like us, and don't vote like us. Now, that doesn't mean I won't talk about God or share my stories of miracles or times when He showed up for me and for others. I believe that sharing our stories encourages others and helps to build that faith empire. Now listen, have you ever been to a memorial service for someone who had great faith? No one says, "We really don't know what she stood for." No, they say things like, "Her great faith was an inspiration to all who knew her," or "She loved others just like Jesus would," or "She worked tirelessly to serve others and help them in their distress." Great faith is a heritage, a legacy, an empire, if you will. And that's where, for me, my mother comes in. My mom was the backbone of our family. By the time I came along, she was 40 years old and had been through the hardest of her years in terms of building her family and her career as a lady preacher. In the early years, I believe she shared a pulpit more with my dad, but by the time I was 7, she was the full-time pastor of a church, and she didn't retire for about another 30 years after that. When I think of my mom, the words faith, heritage, and legacy come to mind for sure. My mom was confident in her faith. She knew God, and God knew her. You will definitely hear more stories about my mom in future episodes, but for now, I want to bring you up to speed about what I mean when I say I have a strong faith heritage. A few years ago, I was visiting my sister. At the time, she lived in a house on the beach in Massachusetts. It was springtime, but it was bitterly cold. all we wanted to do was stay warm. Then we got a message from our cousin Jan, who, by definition, is the family genealogist. And I am not kidding about that. She has done so much research on our family heritage that she's published a 637-page book available on Amazon that outlines the family history on my mother's side back several generations. It's a big, bold, beautiful, and overwhelming book. But back to my story. Jan's message said, "Oh, you're in Massachusetts together. How wonderful. You will, of course, be going to Nantucket, right?" We had no idea what she was talking about. Our response was, "Why would we do that?" So we decided we better call her and find out what in the world she was up to and what she was talking about. And she said, "Well, your 9th great-grandfather, Tristram Coffin, was one of the first settlers on the island. In fact, his daughter, who is our 8th great-grandmother, was known as a great preacher on the island. Her name was Mary Coffin Starbuck. I'm sure you'll see her name all over Nantucket." So bam, that's all we needed. At about 3 o'clock the very next morning, we left the house for a 3-hour drive to catch the ferry to Nantucket, and we spent the entire day exploring. And you know what? Jan was right. The names Coffin and Starbuck were everywhere, and even some mention of our grandmother in a display inside the Whaling Museum. But let's go back to that part about her being a great preacher and this idea of faith heritage. Mary Coffin Starbuck, who became known as Great Mary of Nantucket and was a woman of great power and influence, was consulted upon all matters of public importance because her judgment was superior and she was universally acknowledged to be a great woman. In fact, she's often compared to Deborah in the Bible's Old Testament. She regularly held church meetings in her home and was instrumental in establishing the Quaker faith in that region. Now, 7 generations lie between Great Mary and my mother. And while I'm not really sure how many other men and women of great faith are among them, that heritage definitely stood the test of time. And I do know that the similarities between Mary and my mom are many. There was definitely a heritage there, a lineage of purpose with an intentional faith that led to impact for generations. This is the point I'm trying to make, and this is something I now carry with me. And every day I'm asking, how can I carry on that legacy, that heritage, and continue building this empire of faith in my family line? Well, maybe you can't trace back your family history of faith like I can. I couldn't either until a few years ago. Now, I'm astonished at God's faithfulness in calling members of my family into a place of ministry. I've personally not had that type of calling, but the question still remains, how can I carry this on? And maybe you should ask this question too. How can you and I carry on or even begin to establish the foundation of a faith empire in our families that lasts for generation upon generation upon generation? Something to think about for sure. And we will be hearing more stories in the future episodes. Stories of this legacy of faith, how to establish it and how to nurture it. It'll be so good. Well, I think that's all I have for today. We will introduce the final pillar of empire building next time, and that is finance. A big, big topic for sure. I can't wait to bring you the stories as this podcast grows. See you next time. Hey, I know we just met, but I think we should hang out more than just once a week on this podcast. So head over to Instagram, look up these 2 accounts for me, Empty Nest Empires and Tammy Romani. That's TAMIROMANI. That's where I spend the bulk of my time. It's where you can message me, we can chat back and forth, and get a dialogue going. I would love to know what you think about this podcast. So head on over to Instagram and let's connect, okay? Talk to you soon.